The main thing I want to emphasize today, that I want to share today, is the Buddha's way of teaching the Dhamma and how he transforms others, how he transformed all of us. We believe that the Buddha-Dharma, the Buddha's teaching, can be regarded as what we may call, for one or a better term, creative education. It is not education in the ordinary sense that we normally understand. That is not a system to just provide you with information, to provide you with knowledge you need to find employment and to advance in technology and so on. But education, you might say, in the psycho-spiritual sense, which we call creative education, because it transforms you from lower states to higher states of human existence, of sentient existence. It brings you into domains of higher and higher potentiality in the path of the progressive unfoldment of the human potential. When the human potential is unfolded to the highest, then he is enlightened, he is a Buddha. Talking about enlightenment, by the way, maybe by way of a joke, I was just looking through some of the theses that have been produced in Hong Kong, and even in the institution that I happen to be associated with in the past years. I was surprised to again see how only it is some PhD candidates they produced a thesis that was praised by their supervisor, but actually they talk about, for instance, the whole idea of enlightenment education. What is meant by that is extremely ambiguous and confusing, to say the least. And how the person derives the whole idea of enlightenment. It's bewildering. We don't want to go into this. This is one of my purpose here, to criticize the thesis, but just to tell you that really we have to be very sincere, very honest in understanding the teaching of the Buddha, particularly on such aspects of as enlightenment, of as Buddhahood, and the Buddha's system of education. So, in brief, we would like to call the Buddha's way of teaching an education, but not in the ordinary, as I said, sense of Western modern education, but we call this creative education because it transforms us and brings us to higher and higher, newer and newer states. And that's what creativity consists in. Very briefly, not much to be said about this, but very briefly, his method is one of inspiration. When he teaches, the listeners are inspired. Of course, we can talk about his skillfulness in teaching, how he is rational, how he is logical, how he leads listener to understand his or her own inconsistency, his or own irrationality, contradictions, and then finally helping the person to come to understand a particular point. Well, we are not, today we are not concerned with that aspect of it. Because those aspects also can be covered as education in the ordinary sense, as a skillful teacher. But we want to talk about is what we might call the spiritual method, if you like, a creative method of inspiration. And this method, I have mentioned on other occasions, can be summarized by 4 words. And these are the 4 words you can see that I have highlighted. As I said today, I just came back a couple of days, and this morning I wanted to translate the whole thing, but I just didn't feel enough energy and there's no time. So I searched for these passages. But I will explain slowly to you. Now in the sutras, we come across 4 terms that can serve to summarize Buddha's method of creative education through inspiration. These 4 terms you can see projected is the Buddha Sangdaseti, Samadapeti. Samadapeti sometimes is also given a Samadapeti. Perhaps that's a better form, the correct, because the root is da. And then the third one is Samuttejeti, and the fourth one is Sampahangseti. Now don't be frightened by these Sanskrit Pali words. Sometimes it's important to have some kind of idea of the original words. Otherwise we are misled by English rendering, Chinese renderings, in all the secondary writings. Things can be very confusing in translation. The first word, Sangdasati, actually these are all what you might say causative, is to properly or perfectly even point out, to make known, that is to instruct, to teach. So the first aspect of inspirational creative teaching of the Buddha is that he points out the facts to you. He points out the nature of existence, the nature of the human mind, and so on. He points out possibilities of higher domains of human attainment. This is pointing out, this is instructing. This is the first part. Some, actually the prefix some means completely, fully, and you can say even perfectly. In the case of Buddha, certainly, that is the implication. So he doesn't just simply point out, he points out correctly, fully, appropriately about facts that he needs to point out, and he teaches in the proper, perfect way. So it's Sangdasati. So first part is instruction, pointing out. In Chinese, we have the term hoi si, kai shi. The Buddha reveals the truth. That is pointing out. He doesn't invent the truth. He doesn't artificially, conceptually tells you certain ideas that occurs in the mind. This is not my understanding of the Buddha's insight. His insight is not conceptually built upon, developed, as in the case of an ordinary philosopher or ordinary thinker. He discovers the Dhamma in his enlightenment, the truth. And the truth cannot be negotiated. The truth is eternal truth. And it is said in the sutra clearly that whether a Tathagata appears or not, whether Buddha appears or not, the truth is always there. That is the Dhamma. The word Dhamma, of course, has many, many senses. And here, the sense is the truth. The Buddha, in his enlightenment, discovers it. And that is why the Buddha is said to have been enlightened without a teacher, by himself, because he discovered. It's a matter of discovering the truth, not a matter of studying, conceptualizing, and improving, in intellectual, conceptual terms. And that's why I object to some people, some even the Buddhists themselves, committed Buddhists themselves, scholars, and who want to present the Buddha's teaching in a manner that has been, unfortunately, I think, negatively conditioned by Western way of analyzing the Buddha's teaching. So they speak of the Buddha having taught a particular doctrine, and then he slowly improves on it, and he corrected himself, and because he is so rational and so objective and so reasonable, that he listens to criticisms and then he improves on it. Of course, the Buddha, I'm not saying the Buddha is not receptive to criticism. I'm not saying the Buddha is not reasonable and so on. But in this case, what I want to say is that he's actually pointing out and revealing what he has discovered. So now the method of progressively, gradually, conceptually building up his ideas. So I think it's the wrong way to understand, to appreciate the Buddha's teaching. So the first word here, sangdaseti, that you see on the board, means properly and perfectly showing or pointing out. That is to say, instructing in a spiritual sense. The second term is samadapeti or samadapeti, which means actually he instigates. He instigates. He encourages, but I think a better term is he inspires. That's a key term. I said that his method can be summarized by this word, inspiration, inspiring. I think this word very well sums up the four modes. They're all inspirational, particularly this word, samadapeti. So he discovers a way. He knows how to transcend the human predicament of unsatisfactoriness, of dukkha. And he says, I have done like this. I have transcended dukkha. Why don't you do like this? Live like this. Practice like this. Then you also will transcend dukkha. This is instigating, asking you to do, and this is instigating in the positive way, therefore is inspiration. So first, he reveals, he points out, he instructs. This is the first. Secondly, he encourages, or better still, he inspires. Then the third mode of the teaching, the third term is samuttejeti. And you can translate this term to mean he illuminates, he brightens, he sharpens in some, depending on how you look at the word and explain the word etymologically. Anyway, you can see that all are prefixed by some, which I mean, which, as I said, means perfectly, fully, properly. It's not one-sidedly, not in an extreme way. That the Buddha's teaching is the middle way, in the sense of, not in the sense of compromising. And as I also said just now, not in the sense of progressively, intellectually, conceptually improving, from one stage to another. But if this is the truth, the Buddha points out the full truth to you in just a way that as the truth is, just as it is, and just the way that he should point out. So it is some would from teach, you see, it can be interpreted to mean the sharpen. This in this case, that in the causative, he sharpens your mind. When he teaches, he sharpens the mind of the listener. He brings full awareness into the listener's minds, leads him to full awareness, full mindfulness, and things become clear to him. It's like your mind become illumined, brightened. That is the idea. And then the fourth aspect is sampahangsati, which means he causes the mind of the listener to be happy. This is a very important aspect. He gladdens the listener's mind. When the learner listens to the Buddha's teaching, he feels so inspired, so encouraged, so clearly illumined that he feels happy. People think if the Buddha said everything is impermanent, everything is dukkha, and usually is translated to mean everything is painful. This is a wrong translation, by the way, of the word dukkha. The word doesn't mean painfulness, doesn't mean suffering. Of course, it includes sufferings that one expects. And the Buddha said, well, this is a fact. It's like if you're not feeling well, then you must know that you're not feeling well, but you do not have to not feel well. You do not have to be sick. You can be healthy. And the Buddha teaching doesn't stop at just telling you that you can be healthy. It proceeds to give you the path, the method, the prescription. Take this Dhamma as the medicine and you'll be healthy. And you should be healthy. You should be happy. So Buddhism is not a teaching of pessimism, but actually, ultimately, you could say in a sense, I don't want to overemphasize it in an extreme way. I think if you want to hear, I think it's better here on the positive side to say that it's optimistic ultimately. The message of Buddhism is that we can be happy. We should be happy. Of course, this happiness is not the ordinary happiness that we experience in conditioned existence, because no doubt there are happiness in a relative sense, but they are not lasting. And when you contrast to your earlier experiences, the experience of others, you feel unhappy, and you feel dissatisfied. This is human nature. But there is a happiness that is eternal, that is absolute, that is constant, and that is the happiness that one attains in enlightenment, in Nibbana. And that, the Buddha says, is attainable by all of us, is an inborn potentially in all of us. So given the message like that, you can surely say that Buddhism is, to say the least, is not a message of pessimism. It's a message of happiness in the true ultimate sense. Nowadays, people talk about sustainable happiness. You can see posters, even for Buddhist courses, in search of sustainable. What do they mean? I don't really understand. Because you can't get it just by doing a course in in your MA course or whatever, But certainly, if you practiced the Dhamma, you have got a way to attain truly, in the true sense, sustainable happiness. That is ultimate, non-relative happiness in Nibbana. That is the goal of Buddhism. So the goal of Buddhism is happiness. And the process also must be one of happiness, even though it is not the ultimate happiness, but it must be progressively a happy state of mind. So I think this is one thing we have to correct ourselves. Do not look at Buddhism in a negative, pessimistic way. You have to be aware of dukkha, of unsatisfactoriness, or even of pain and sufferings, and they can help you. But it is from pain that one comes to higher states, and then higher states, and then higher states. Happier state. I have explained that. Today I don't want to go back to those things. It takes time, but very briefly, that is this whole series of what we may call transcendental condition co-arising, a positive co-arising, which teaches you that from one stage, from one link, you come to a higher link, each of progressive happiness, progressive state conducive to ultimate liberation. So, in this context, I'm referring to this, for instance, the state of so-called suffering, dukkha. Yes, you start with there. People come to Buddhism because they are depressed. And there's nothing wrong about that. In a way, it's good. that we experience something is missing in my life. I don't feel full satisfaction in my life. I feel empty. I feel depressed. I think you don't have to be afraid of that. If you are spiritually sensitive, if you are truly religious, I would say, you feel that. You should feel that. In fact, often when we practice meditation, when we are more and more committed to the spiritual life, to spiritual striving, and suddenly we become very sensitive to our own states of mind, and we feel unhappy, we feel depressed. There's nothing wrong about that. When we become preoccupied and become obsessed with this, then you truly have problems in a psychological sense. You get stuck there. You should make use of these states of experiences to spur you up to something higher. So in the Buddha's teaching of what you might call the transcendental dependent origination, you start with dukkha, you start with so-called suffering or unsatisfactoriness. If you are not aware of this, then you can't progress. If you are not aware that you are not well, then how can you be well? If you are not aware of the human predicament, how can you begin to look up and see, can I go to higher states? Can a human being, is a human being capable of attaining highest, are there higher states? Are there higher possibilities, and how can I go towards them? So the starting point is, that is why mindfulness is important. In this case, mindfulness of your state of, you might even say in this case, suffering or unsatisfactoriness. But it is a state that should spur you on to something higher. So it's said that dependent upon so-called suffering, dukkha, one gains faith. Faith is the next state. Faith is something that makes you happy. Yes, there is hope. Yes, there's a way out. Yes, there are higher states. Yes, I can reach those higher states. Yes, there are ways to lead me to those higher states. So you respond. Responsiveness, receptiveness is your faith. So faith is not for the weaklings. Faith is for someone who has spiritual awareness, who is capable of responding to higher states, higher possibilities. So from suffering, you come to the next stage is from faith. And then it goes like that, from states, and then you get excited. You get tremendous release of energy. Yes, I found a way. Yes, this is the path. The Dhamma is a path. Let me be committed. Truly, I don't hesitate anymore. I will take the step of commitment. I make the leap. I want to follow the Buddha. I want to be a Buddhist. I want to take refuges. And then you practice, and then from excitement, your excitement subsides. You come to more serene kind of happiness, and then to mental peacefulness, and then to and so on. You see, and the pliability of the body and mind, and then to full integrations, and then finally to insight. So the whole thing, of course, I have abbreviated it, but is I want to tell you that it's a sequence. It's a causal sequence consisting of progressively happier and happier, higher and higher states. Positive, when you contrast it, for instance, to another important, equally important, of course, exposition of the usual exposition of dependent origination. Because of ignorance, and then you have conditioning forces. Because of conditioning forces, then you have rebirth consciousness. Then you are reborn. Then you grow old. Then in the process of your living, you suffer. You have sickness. You fall, you die, and then you go on. You get trapped around and around. That is the kind of a negative exposition. That is also equally important. But very few people know that in the Buddha's teaching, in the sutta, there is a corresponding positive exposition that I have told you, which starts with suffering, from suffering to faith, and it goes on like that, in a more and more progressively happy state. So coming back to the Buddha's method of inspiration, this fourth feature highlights the aspect of making of the Dhamma making us happy. So when you listen to Dhamma, you should feel a sense of happiness. There's another term in Buddhism which is called Dhamma piti, Dhamma joy. Even in the midst of our depression, in the midst of our failings, we should feel happy. Yes, I fall down, I slip down, it's okay. Everybody falls down. Because everybody has raga, dosa, moha. No one is perfect. Let me get up again. I have my goal. I never lose sight of my ultimate goal. Let me go on again. I'll fall again tomorrow. Let me try again and again. If I can't succeed this life, I will succeed in one of my future lives. So this is a commitment. So the whole path of practice of Buddhism actually should be accompanied by true spiritual joy. You feel happy that there is hope when you have the Dhamma, when you have the teacher, when you're able to listen to the Dhamma, reflect on the Dhamma, you have a chance to practice Dhamma. When you feel hope, there is happiness, even in the midst of your suffering. So, to summarize then, this, what I call creative educations of the Buddha, is characterized particularly by these four aspects. First one is revealing, pointing out to you the truth. Well, to begin with, even though you might not like it, people point out to you, your teacher point out to you, you don't like to listen. And somehow, oh, no, this is not right, this is negative, this is egotistic, this is craving, this is so on. Usually people don't like that. They react. Before they finish listening, they react and defend themselves. It may be painful to be pointed out, but I think you should be grateful that it's a great help to you. So it's like I told you the story of Milarepa. I'm fond of citing the story. So pointing out the truth to you can include things that make you unhappy, at least in a relative sense. But that is a starting point. That is a start. You must face up with yourself, with the truths. So if Buddha says everything is unsatisfactory and everything is impermanent and so on, it's sometimes very difficult to accept, to stomach the Dhamma. But you have to learn to accept, to face it if you are committed to it, if you want to know how to go further. So this is the starting point. Then the Buddha will encourage you, well, okay, if you really want to improve yourself, if you really want to follow the Dhamma, if you really want to be happier and happier in the spiritual sense, live like this, practice like this. There are meditations, there are devotions, like today we are doing on Sunday. Develop your spiritual emotions, bring out your human emotions, and not just listen to Dhamma in the books or in the classroom or in a talk. Experience your emotions and do annihilate yourself. And feel very much that you're human as your spiritual emotions, religious emotions are brought out. So this is encouraging, instigating. And then your mind become illumined, you become happy, you become brightened, you become sharpened, and you are more aware, and finally you feel happy. Finally, yes, although I'm not perfect, yes, I make mistake, yes, I do suffer, I feel depression, but I have found a way now. I have my commitment now. I have made a decision now. I have a release of energy now. It can be a tremendous release of energy when you come to that stage. And this is happiness. So there are these four aspects. Yeah? So you see in the suttas that very often the Buddha is said to perform these four, if you like, spiritual functions of pointing out or of revealing or teaching, of instigating or encouraging or inspiring, of brightening or sharpening, and then of gladdening. Remember these four. You remember I gave you the Chinese words? Si, Gao, Lei, Hei. Or Si, Jiu, Lei, Hei. Xuan Zhang has even more literal translations, and what I give you are very commonly well-known Chinese words for four words. Huh? It occurred throughout the suttas, not in one sutta, many, many places. Yeah? So, now, this, you might think, okay, the Buddha can do that, the Buddha does that, but the Buddha is no more with us now. And can the Dhamma still have that function? But if it's true Dhamma, yes, it should. There are teachers. Even though the teachers are not perfect, but they come from a tradition. A tradition is very important. And that tradition is a continuous tradition. Continuous means you can trace it back to the Buddha's enlightenment. It all comes from the Buddha's enlightenment. It flows down. It's called an emanation, outflow. And particularly in Northern Buddhism, there's a term for it, called nishanta. Shant means to flow. Flowing out, flowing. It flows directly from the experience of enlightenment. That wisdom, that enlightenment is passed out continuously without interruption. This is what tradition is in the spiritual sense. And in this continuous tradition, you have a teacher-pupil continuation, succession, right, in which all these teachers and pupils also practice the Dhamma. That's the important thing. If there's no practice, then it is not a spiritual, you can say, succession or continuation. But in this continuation, there are practices and there are realizations, there are meditations, there are reflections. So the whole flow has not been interrupted, has never been interrupted. Traceable back to the Buddha enlightenment. So in this way, this is what we call tradition. That's why tradition is very important. Although on the one hand, Buddhism tells you not to be attached to tradition, not to be attached to a guru and so on, you see. But the true meaning is not to tell you to disown, to forsake tradition. It tells you not to be irrationally attached to your tradition. But you must also, and perhaps more importantly, be receptive to a true spiritual tradition. And this includes teachers, even teachers who are not perfect. They may not be perfect, but they have got the Dhamma. They have taught more about you about the Dhamma. They have reflected more than you about the Dhamma. They have practiced more than you about the Dhamma. So be receptive and listen to them, even though they are not perfect. Don't expect saints now. This is another extreme, another problem, another mystic of modern Buddhist. If he is my teacher, if he is a monk or a nun, why he's like that, why he's not perfect? Who can be perfect? But important is sincerity. Important thing is practice. Important thing is whether he has got a Dhamma. It's like, I say, like the case of a doctor, medical doctor. My medical doctor, I have diabetes. My medical doctor said that he also has diabetes. He's also taking medicines, right? And he has a longer history of diabetes than I do. But that doesn't prevent him from helping others like me, or giving me prescription, giving medicine, and monitoring my progress. And he is only using now a continuous monitoring system, and he shows you how to use it, how to make use of it. So he's saving people, he's helping people. He's got the medicine. So if the teachers, if your spiritual friends, and sometimes not just the teacher, but everybody can be a teacher in a sense, even your core practitioners can help you if they have the Dhamma, if they are committed to the Dhamma, if they are sincere about the Dhamma, even though they may also have their weaknesses, their failures, but they have the Dhamma. They are concerned about the Dhamma sincerely, then they can be your teachers. You can be together inspired by the Dhamma. He can pass on the inspiration to you. So today also, if you ask a question whether this whole idea of creative education can be applied today, given the fact that we are so distant from the Buddha's time, my answer is absolutely yes. Yes, because there is the tradition. Because the Dhamma is still here. We are lucky the Dhamma is still here. So, in the sutras also, you see that, in fact, not only the Buddha is described as always teaching in this manner. He meets a group of people, and sometimes they come to challenge the Buddha, you see. And the Buddha didn't reject them. The Buddha let them talk and let them have a chance to challenge him. But finally, they all bowed down to him. There are sutta which shows that they were, at that time, some sophists. They were not Buddhist. They were not interested in Buddhism. They were moving around and looking for religious teachers to encounter with, to defeat, to ridicule and humiliate. So a group of, for instance, it is said a group of sophists like that, a group of kind of cynics like that, they heard that the Buddha was so highly respected and said to be perfect, and fully wise, and they decided, yeah, let us go and meet this man and let us humiliate him. Let us defeat him because we are so clever, so intelligent. So they think like that. No? So they frame their questions and prepare the answers. And I will go to Gautama the Buddha, so-called Buddha, the Samana Gautama. We ask this question. If he answers like this, we'll counter ask a question like that. If they answer like that, we'll counter a question like this. So they've got to prepare everything. And the sole purpose is to defeat, to humiliate the Buddha. Yeah? Then they went to the Buddha. And ultimately, to cut the story short, the Buddha sangdaseti samadapeti samuttejeti sampahanseti. That is, the Buddha reveals the truth to them, inspires them, brightens them, make them happy. Suddenly, before they have a chance to bring out their papers, I don't know whether you can speak of papers at that time, the prepared notes, as it were, to further challenge the Buddha, they felt that they don't want to ask anymore. They don't want to nothing to challenge the Buddha. They simply bow down at the feet of the Buddha, say, Gautama Buddha, from today onwards, we want to be your disciples. That is the effect of his inspirational teaching. That's, in that sense, Buddhism is creative education because they transform the people. Such negatively minded cynics, so-called sophists, they were not spiritual at all. They were not interested in, question of nature, existence, or human mind. Or they didn't want to learn about ultimate truths and such things. They didn't want. less deal was the Dhamma of Gautama, but ultimately they were inspired. So inspired that they say, from today onwards until the end of my life, as long as I breathe, I want to be your disciples. Please bear in mind that I have become your disciple. I have taken refuge in you. I'm one who has taken refuge in you until my last breath. It's so touching. This is the effect of inspiration. So we see the Buddha's teaching like this in many, many places to various people. There are people who are not like that. They are more receptive, but still they have a lot of doubt and question. Like for instance, some Brahmins, some heretics. They were religious people. They were good people, but they were not convinced in Buddhism, in the Dhamma, and they went to question the Buddha and argue with the Buddha. And the Buddha gave them chance and skillfully guided them. And finally, through these four features of inspirational, transformational, or if you like, creative teaching, they came to be inspired. We see these stories this kind of episodes everywhere in the suttas. But I would also like to point out to you that it's not in the case of the Buddha alone that these four characteristics are ascribed. It's so interesting and important to note that some of the Buddha's disciples are said to possess these four qualities in their teachings. And this is very important. And so as I said, the disciple may not be fully like the Buddha, but of course in the case of the disciple at the time of the Buddha, they were spiritually very advanced, even though they may not be fully liberated saint as a Buddha, but they certainly have a lot of insight, and they certainly have practiced a lot, have succeeded a lot in the Buddha's time. But you can see that on the basis of the same principle, we can say that even today, because of the continuous, as I said, tradition, this uninterrupted from the Buddha's time, then this possibility of transformation, possibility of creative education is still here available to us. So here I just want to give you one example. It is said in the sutta that there are a couple of suttas that bear the words Patekarata Sutta. This term is a bit difficult to translate, it's somewhat ambiguous, and it depends on how you look at it. But one way to understand is Bhatta Eka Rata. Rata is meaning like Rata, Rati meaning the night. So you can say, as I noticed that Venerable Bhikkhu and others have also rendered in this way, that he had a different rendering earlier, and the rendering today you see in his newer edition is that he said auspicious single night. Still a bit mysterious. What is this auspicious single night? Okay, so let me suggest perhaps significance of the title. It's like this very single night itself, Eka, this very single night itself is not to be missed. It's the most important. Let's see how the meaning comes out. Okay, in this sutta, Venerable Ananda was a preacher, you see. And at one time, you can see the Pali here, if you can read it, in Savatthi and in the pleasure park of Ananda Pitaka. And Ananda was in the assembly hall, and he Sangdesyati, Samadapeti, Samutejati, Sampahangsati, the bhikkhus in the hall. In other words, with the Dhamma talk, Dhammiya Kataya. In other words, he in the hall, he assembles the bhikkhus and he reveals the truth to them, he inspires them, he sharpens them or brightens them, and he gladdens them. Of course, with the Dhamma talk. You see, Ananda was doing that. It's not the Buddha. That is significance. Remember, according to Buddhist tradition, in the Buddha's time, Ananda was not yet an Arahant. He has still a lot of emotion. That's why when the Buddha was passing away, he couldn't help crying, because he was so attached to the Buddha. It's understandable. He served the Buddha for 25 years. The Buddha was everything to him. He gave his whole life to the Buddha. So he was crying. And you see the famous statue sometimes, the pictures of Mahaparinibbana. The Buddha was lying down, and then Ananda was standing on one side and with his hands kind of covering his chest, his heart, and he was actually grief. And you see the very touching, inspiring, I would say, statue like this in Sri Lanka, for instance, in many other places, of course. In Sri Lanka, there's a place called Polonna Ruba. That whole episode was carved in rock. We know that Thomas Merton also was inspired. He was a Catholic monk, but he was so inspired by Buddhism, he wanted to learn more firsthand. And finally, he went to Thailand and Sri Lanka. And unfortunately, he met with an accident in Thailand, and he passed away. And posthumously, his diary was published, where he described how he was inspired when he see these statues and so on. Anyway, that's another story to tell you perhaps some other day. Now, so Ananda, according to tradition then, was not a saint. He was not liberated from human emotion. He was an ordinary human being. In fact, the story says that even after the Buddha passed away, and when Kassapa, Mahakassapa, conveyed the so-called first Sangiti, first rehearsal, so-called, of the Dhamma, and 500 Arahats were invited, and Ananda could not attend that because he was not Arahant. So the story went that the day and the night before the happening of that event, Ananda worked very, very hard, and he got himself enlightened. And anyway, there was a story like that. So, okay, the significance is this. Ananda was not without his failings, weaknesses as an ordinary human being. So he was a bhikkhu, but he has so much Dhamma from, this is tradition. He embodied the tradition of the Buddha. In his case, of course, the more direct one, that's in the very time of the Buddha, and he was in the very presence, all the time with the Buddha. But anyway, what we have today is similar. If that tradition is not interrupted, of course that is the if here, then there is spirituality, there is hope. And there is suddenly the possibility of creative education. So Ananda represents that. So Ananda was said to have done like this one day in the assembly hall. And then the next day, probably Ananda did it in the evening. I don't know. Or in the daytime, in the evening. And the next day, then Buddha visited the same place, and then he heard about this. And he asked Ananda, did you do like that? And Ananda said, yes, I did. And then Buddha asked, well, how did you, of course, what did he do? He did it with one very interesting and I would say very inspiring stanza. Today I don't have time to give you fully, but at least I give a gist of that teaching. He expounded a stanza, a brief teaching, and of course it is said Udesa as well as Vibhanga. That is a brief teaching, also accompanied by expositions, both the elaboration and the concise statements and the stanza itself. And in that way, he reviews, he inspires, he sharpens, and he gladdens the bhikkhus in the hall. So Buddha said, how do you do that? And then Ananda says, Venerable Sir, I expounded this sutta in brief as well as in details, if you like. And what is this sutta? So first thing is to note that it's not only the Buddha who was described as frequently teaching like this, generally teaching like that, even the disciples. Okay, now before I come back to this, to explain a little bit on the stanza to you, I think a lot of time has gone. Let me show you another place in another shorter sutta passage statement. This is this time from the Anguttara Nikaya, and Buddha is teaching that there's one Dhamma, there's one thing that's very important to do, and which leads to the generation of great merit. And this sutta, this is interesting, and we discussed it in the class on Friday. You see, and here first thing it underscores the value of Buddhism. What is meant by merit? How do we accrue merit? And this merit clearly in this context doesn't refer to merit you get by, giving away your money and food and material things. Not like that. Not even ordinary education. That's very interesting. What is it? Well, it is inspiring others in the Dhamma. So it goes like this. Then you can see, I have taken the note that Venerable Nagasena has prepared. This is to save my time. You can see that he said, Swakate bhikkhave dhamma vinaye yo yocha samadapeti yancha samadapeti yocha samadapito tatathaya padipacchati sapete bahong punyang pasavanti. Pasavanti means they produce, they generate. Bahung sunya means great merit. Who? He says sapete. All of them, all those people. Who are they? One, yocha samadapeti Dhamma Vinaya. In the Dhamma Vinaya, in the well-spoken swakate Dhamma Vinaya, in the well-declared, well-thought. Why is the Dhamma said to be well-thought? Not because it has beautiful wording and gives you promises